how wisdom and life connect with this issue of folks who can't protect themselves. We're going to be quoting from Proverbs. We're going to be telling some stories about folks who are actually out there doing it. And this kind of thing is really important to us, not only in Indianapolis, but in this state, around the country, around the world.
Well, we ask you to get prepared, get ready. We'll be right back after this next song, and we'll have this valuable information. This is Warp and Woof Radio on RadioNext.tv and the Cool Groove site. Last 7 days.
Wonderful.
Today is a great show, and it's amazing. I told you how affirmation is. We're going to be doing a show this Saturday on people who can't protect themselves. And then when I got your notes about what we're talking about today, how ironic that we're talking about that. And today's segments, as you mentioned, is coming from Proverbs 24:10 through 12, 29:7, and 31:8-9. And so if you have your Bibles out, or if you're on your laptop,
there you go.
Go to your computer Bible if you choose to. But why should we care about others, Dr. Mark? And what compels me to want to reach out and help those who are hurting?
Yeah.
When we start talking about those who can't protect themselves.
This is really important stuff. So HB's already given us the passages. I'll read the first one. Proverbs 24:10-12 says this: "Rescue those who are being taken away to death. Hold back those who are stumbling to the slaughter. If you say, 'Behold, we didn't know this,' does not he who weighs the heart perceive it? Does not he who keeps watch over your soul know it? And will he not repay man according to his work?" There is a great old commitment hymn called "Rescue the Perishing." And one of the lines in that old hymn says, "Touched by a loving heart, wakened by kindness," that's God's kindness, "cords that were broken will vibrate once more." This passage in the book of Proverbs 24:10-12 says that I demonstrate my commitment to love other people and to demonstrate my love for God by loving other people. So this kindness that comes from God motivates my own heart. God knows my motives and why I do certain things. So that's what verse 12 is all about. So if I do good, I can feel good about myself, or I can do good so others will see me. Those aren't real good motivations. God sees those motivations. The intention must be driven by what we always say on this show: do good, do good, do good, out of Titus 3. And that's all based on the one event that Jesus died on the cross for my sin. He redeemed me, he saves me, and now I give to others what was given to me. Titus 3 says my salvation from sin is not based on good works, but on Jesus' good work, and I don't need works for my salvation, but I do need works to demonstrate my salvation. So there it is. After Paul
I saw that out on your Facebook post this morning.
That's right.
And I just started laughing because I said, that is power.
Yeah, that's it. And we got to work the works after the work has been done for us through the work of Jesus.
You know, it's amazing, and we're bringing you the show today, Comenius Institute. We have to remember this great organization that you're a part of, but when we talk about Jesus dying on the cross and Easter coming and the resurrection itself, It is amazing when you think about how Christ died on the cross and never once asked for one thing back.
That's right.
But we as human beings will do something kind and then think we expect something
That's
back.
right. Yeah.
Let's talk about justice.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's talk about social justice.
Okay.
You know, what is it?
Yeah. This is a really important issue. And let me just speak specifically to the phrase social justice, and then I want to talk about just the word justice. Social justice is a phrase, folks are just throwing this thing around today. And what's really important to understand is that when folks throw in that phrase social justice around, it really depends on what their social is. Now, I'm not talking about Social Security. I'm talking about what social group or community they're really invested in. So if your group or community is concerned about X, Y, or Z, then that's going to be social justice for you. But quite frankly, social justice does not work unless you have a basis for justice. So the real question is, what is the basis for justice? Now, in the Old Testament, in God's Word, the words righteousness and justice are inseparable. They go hand in hand. You see one, you're going to see the other. The word righteousness or righteous literally means straight. So you're looking for the straight line. The word sin, by the way, means crooked, something that's crooked. So it's very obvious the difference between righteousness and sin. So righteousness gives us the standard for justice, and this is the basis for protecting God-given rights. Now, I got to tell folks about this book, HB, that was just kind of revolutionized my life back in 2010. The book is entitled A Search for God and Guinness. Now, I hope I'm not upsetting anybody about talking about beer this morning, but I'm talking about the Guinness Beer Company that was started at the end of the 18th century, and Guinness was a Christian. Now, not only did he produce a really good product, which, by the way, in 2004, the University of Wisconsin actually discovered that drinking a pint of Guinness every day is good for the human body. But beside all of that, let me read to you some of the things that Guinness was doing in all of these years in the Guinness Company. He had health care, which included 2 dentists, 2 pharmacists, 2 nurses, and a masseuse. These were free to his employees. Retirees received pensions without having to make contributions. The company provided a savings bank on site and contributed a fund from which workers could borrow to purchase houses. Imagine this. The corporation paid for employees to attend technical schools, funding more advanced education for those folks who wanted it. They had a lending library, a musical society, lounges for contemplation, athletic leagues were maintained on site. Every employee was paid to take his family on holidays. In addition, each employee received an extra week's wages above and beyond his normal pay to celebrate a jubilee. And when its employees were called up to serve in the military, their families continued to collect a salary, and the worker's job awaited them upon their term of service completion. Now, I'm not talking to you about Google or Amazon. I'm talking to you about Guinness, a company that was started over 200 years ago. When I read these things in 2010, about 6 years ago, I finished the introduction to this book and I wept. I wept because the awfulness of the recession that we had just been through in 2008 and 2009, and my thought constantly during that time was, if employers, if companies, if corporations would do good for their people, oh my word, what could happen?
That's powerful stuff.
Yes.
I mean, and like you say, and we keep going back. Pastor Hudson was on a few weeks
yes,
ago
sir.
Talking technology, not the tools.
Yeah.
The science of how you use the tools, and he did it back then, over 200 and some odd years
That's
ago.
right. He was doing it.
We have to get back to that today as we close this first segment. Why can't we just mind our own business? Why do we have to get involved? That's what the couch potato thinks.
Exactly, right?
That's what the guy sitting back just thinks. Why do we need to stand up, get up, and create some type of fuss for someone else's justice?
Honestly, I'm even thinking about D'Amico Southern, who was in here a few weeks ago, who was talking about Big Mama, who was involved in his life, a grandma who looked after you, those kinds of things. But we need to stop turning a blind eye to the things that are happening around us in our community and accept this word, which is a real word, an important word. Get this now, hear it close. Responsibility. Responsibility. Now, I told you I had lots of stories this morning. Let me tell you about this other one. One of my favorite little books is entitled All I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It was written by the famous Robert Fulghum, and he tells a story about his dad. He said that Robert Fulghum would ring the Salvation Army bell every Christmas, and here's the reason why. When Robert Fulghum's family's house was burned to the ground, the only people who stepped up was the Salvation Army. And so after that point, Robert Fulghum's dad, not necessarily a Christian, Robert Fulghum, a great man, not necessarily a Christian, but he's telling this story. He says, my dad rung that bell because they stepped up, the Salvation Army stepped up for him. And he said, and Robert Fulghum says, I still go and ring the bell today because this is my responsibility. We can't just say, mind my own business or folks in trouble and I can help. There might be something little I can do. Maybe I clean up my neighborhood. Maybe I provide materials for school. Maybe I just spend time with people. There's a novel concept like last week, Comenius. My group of folks from IUPUI, my students, come over for a movie night. We just sit down and have a good time for 4 or 5 hours watching some film, talking, having a good time eating pizza. And it was a great time. Just yesterday, going for lunch to the Comenius group, we had a tremendous conversation, 2+ hours. We talked about everything under the sun, their academics, their scholarships, their futures. Spend time with people, do something. Start small, start somewhere, but start.
How ironic you mentioned that, and Mr. Anthony Beverly who's the Stop the Violence,
yes, sir.
And we took what, 5 minutes
Yes.
to build a relationship.
Yes.
Where now you and he, some
Right.
way, were warping and woofing and blending these threads together. That's going to be a launching pad for somebody's life.
That's right. In the
So
future. You
that's
bet.
what we're doing, but we're protecting the innocent today
Exactly.
up in here. And I'm fired up. Mark is going to come on. And don't forget the second hour. We've got Dountonia Batts coming in, and she's going to tell you how to help protect those who can't protect themselves. You're listening to Cool Wolf Radio, RadioNext.tv on the Cool Wolf. You are listening to Warp and Woof Radio. Dr. Mark Eckel, Harold H.B. Bell in the house. And before we get back to this second segment, Marilyn Eve, Grandpa loves you. And of course, the Queen, Miss Virginia Eckel, we love you too. Just loving this up in here today. This topic has us so inspired that off the air, the conversation just continues. We also have Mr. Phil Weepower Moore taking care of some technical advantages, as we say, tools of the day are happening. But today we're talking about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. And this is so important. We have a population of people, some that are not only physically, mentally, but just oppressed. Yes. And those people are being preyed upon today. I mean, everything from, when we talk about protecting people, we're talking about check cashing places. We're talking about desert areas where there are no grocery stores. I mean, this is far deeper than the physical manipulation of taking over someone. We're talking about economics. We're talking about everything. Yep. So leading into this second segment, you sent me a text. If it bleeds, it leads. Yeah. And that's how we get our news most of the time. Most of the time that news is negative, Mark.
That's right.
Why so?
Yeah. This is, we live in a sinful world, bottom line, and the awfulness that we see all around us. And I have to say, make a mention of this. Our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts go out to all of those folks in Brussels who have endured such an awfulness under this new terrorist attack. Of course, we condemn all of that, but lift up our mercy and grace to those good people. When we talk about the bad news, we understand that there are sinful people in the world who want to do bad stuff to us, and we know that that kind of thing is going to go on. But the real issue is now, what are we going to do about it? So I hear people complain about, the news is always bad, and we're always hearing just the negative stuff. And my comment to them is, go make good news, man. Go do something that's good in the culture so that people can say, hey, these are good things. So we've got to create news that's good news for good news coverage. Now, there are stories all over town about Christian folk doing good things. As we always say in this program, Titus 3, do good, do good, do good. There's a little boy in a hospital. He had a real long stay in the hospital. Just heard this story recently. Church folks stepping up to help mama at home, to sit with the family at the hospital. That's where that's about. That's what that's about. We're anxious to give to other people because those folks have needs, and we can meet those needs, even if it's a small thing, just taking food to the hospital, taking food to the house, sitting with people, spending time. Prison visits, regular care for the little ones at home that are left behind. If mom or dad are inside and those little ones need help. Jim Striedelmeyer was on the show this past week. Here's a man who spent 20 years downtown on 10th Street, Neighborhood Fellowship Church. And he's got an IU medical group sending interns every single Saturday to give free health care for people. He's taking care of prostitutes on the street outside of his church building. Man, this guy is moving and shaking, and these are the kinds of things that create good news.
Say Jim Striedelmeyer. That's my man. Yeah. Boy, he's out there, too, doing some great works. It's amazing, though, the people that give, but then their giving isn't from, as we mentioned, Jesus died on the cross and didn't ask for anything.
That's right.
The property of just giving for the sake of giving and loving for the sake of loving doesn't have a payback.
That's right.
Not in a physical presence. Let God do that for you. Mm-hmm. How do we get people to give freely?
Yeah. This is a change of attitude. Frankly, it's a mindset shift is what I tell my students. You have to create different habits of thought. So when we think about these kinds of things about doing good, we have to ask ourselves the question, why am I doing the good thing? If I'm doing it because it makes me feel good, or if I want somebody to look at me, or even if I think, well, God's going to look at me and think this is good works. No, man, none of that stuff is good.
Can't do nothing big enough to impress God.
Exactly right. So when you talk about doing good works, you've got to emphasize what it is that we're going to do for somebody else without getting anything back. So here's a story. I just sat for 2.5 hours with a pastor this week, a local pastor. He's got an elementary school sitting behind his church building. He goes to the principal and he asks one question. He says, "What's your greatest need?" Principal, good woman. She says, first thing out of her mouth, doesn't even skip a beat. She says, "My 4th grade boys." So he goes back, pastor goes back to his church. He said, "I want some men to step up to do some mentoring." And so 8 men step up. These guys are going and meeting with these young boys, 4th, 5th, 6th grade students. This is a K-6 school. And so now these young people are getting some really good mentoring. But it doesn't stop there. It goes beyond this. Now the mentors are going to the homes, and they're meeting moms and dads. And now the story continues where this one guy has a bracelet around his ankle. He's got home arrest, but you know what? He's listening to the gospel. And so now the mentors are sharing the gospel with these folks. And this last week, this man and his whole family come to church, and they become Christians.
That's what I'm talking about.
Now, these are good things. This is good news. These are the kinds of things that happen when we do the good thing, reach out, just simply spend time with folks.
So plant a seed of good. And was interesting. I was reading scripture from Romans the other day about if the root is pure, the lump is pure, and if the lump is pure, then the branches will be pure.
Yeah.
And if we do it with the intentions of, I just want to do good. I don't want anything back. God, just let me do good. Then the manifestation of that turns, and it's incredible.
That's right.
We are human. How do we pick our battles? We can't do everything.
That's right.
So how do we protect the innocent in the vein, in the way that you're shaped to do?
Yeah. You know what? Maybe you like to read, and your passion is just going to the library and reading books. Find a little one that you can go read with. We've been talking on this show about the need for young people before the 3rd grade to be able to learn how to read. And if they don't, then of course there's a great downturn for their lives in the future. So go find somebody that's struggling with reading and read to them and help them read. Maybe you like to talk. You just like to talk, man. You just sit and talk to people. Go find an older person who doesn't have anybody. Just go find that old person, sit and talk with them, somebody who needs company. We had Tim Algrim up here this last week. This guy up in Lafayette, he's lifting weights with his wrestlers, and that's all he does. He just shows up. So you show up, man. It doesn't matter what it is that you do. Just show up. I tell people all the time, you're going to either spend money or you're going to spend time, and most of us just have time. So pick something that you're passionate about and get to it. I just mentioned this a moment ago. Start somewhere, start small, but start.
But that is interesting that you say, and it's almost like we talk about in education, where to connect. Connect where the people are.
That's right.
And if you connect with yourself, now you can go give your passion. And if you give your passion, it won't be difficult to get.
Not at all.
Yeah,
Not
because
at all.
now you're doing what you love to do and sharing that with someone.
Exactly right.
And you're talking more of sharing when we're talking about protecting. We're
exactly.
talking about, share your gift, share your life.
Right.
Before we go to the next segment, tell us about some movies that talk about protecting those who cannot protect themselves. I can think of a few that just come to mind. I can even think of a television show, as corny as it might sound, Fonzie. on Happy Days back in the day. He was a tough, rough guy, but Fonzie used to always come. He was always about protecting.
Looking out for his people.
Looking out for his people,
That's it, yeah.
And he was supposed to be like the rowdy guy. But give me some movies.
Sure. Well, we wrote this movie book, When the Lights Go Down, Movie Review as Christian Practice, a couple of years ago. And here are some that I've found just digging through my own book. A good movie that I think HBU and I were talking about last week. We couldn't remember the name of it. Finding Forrester with Sean Connery. There it is. With Sean Connery and Rob Brown. Here's an older writer protecting the reputation of a young man. What an important film this is. If you're at all interested in writing and seeing folks continue in their education, this is huge. I'm thinking about Frozen River. If you're a mama who's by herself, you're a single mom, Melissa Leo, did an Oscar-nominated performance in Frozen River. What Will a Mother Do to Protect Her Children? Fantastic film, Frozen River. Life of a King, I mentioned this a couple weeks ago, Cuba Gooding Jr. He used chess to reach out to kids on the street. This was his means of connecting with people, sharing. And he was protecting people by giving people something else to focus on. And one more, I mentioned Maria Sorvino, who's a Christian. She's done a number of really fine films, but now really focusing on the human needs. She did a television series called Human Trafficking, which was highly rated on IMDb, the International Movie Database. She's doing all kinds of good stuff, movies that are promoting good and helping people, putting this stuff in front of folks so we don't forget it.
And that is so interesting. As we say, we're warping and woofing all the time at RadioNext.tv. This Saturday morning, if you want to find out some extensive information about human trafficking, the Julian Center will be on the Jumbo Love Show between 8 and 12 this Saturday morning. And this is going to show us as well some of the things that are going on to innocent people.
That's right.
That can't protect themselves and how we can help protect them. So we're going to take a short break. Warping and woofing on the radio.
Yes,
and if you don't know, Mark, tell them what warp and woof means, because we want to make this part of the vernacular.
Absolutely. So warp and woof is the vertical and horizontal threads that make fabric. Every piece of clothing you have right now has been warped and woofed. And the whole concept behind this for the Christian comes out of Colossians 1:17. By him, by Christ, are all things held together. So he's the fabric, he's the wholeness, he's the oneness of all of life.
And what's beautiful about this is we want to say hello to my little sister out there, Tracy Drain, and her whole 3M work department, listening in on this great show. And they told you great show today. So welcome in, and we thank you. As we go to this last segment, and we have Dountonia Batts in the house, and just excited to talk with her on this next hour about how we can help those who can't protect themselves have a covenant, have a grace over them, and just from your human spirit and your human nature, what you can do. The Bible talks a lot about protecting widows and orphans. Today's world has a lot of single mothers out here, and this God knew this was happening. He knew this was coming, and so I mean, seriously. So Word was already designed to say, here's how we're going to protect that element of the population.
That's right. So just a couple of stories here to get us going on this piece. Back in the day when I was teaching in high school, we started a program called Rake and Run. And Rake and Run was designed to literally go out into the community and rake up all the leaves of folks who couldn't get out and do this themselves. We worked with the Council on Aging in our community. And so that's just one small example of the kinds of things that we can do. Orphans and widows in Scripture is a phrase from Leviticus. Remember last week we talked about Leviticus. It's a phrase from Leviticus that says, we need to take care of those who can't care for themselves. That's literally what that means. So it's not just orphans, it's not just widows, it's anybody who has needs who can't protect themselves. So for instance, my mother-in-law lived in our home for up to 7 years, and we took care of her as best we could, as long as we could, through all the physical needs that she particularly had. We have taken care of mentally challenged individuals in our home. And if it wasn't for you, they said, we might be living in a refrigerator box under an overpass. When we're talking about orphans and widows, we're talking about anybody who can't care for themselves. So to answer the question, how does this thing apply to us today? This is all Jesus, because it's salt and light. Light invades the darkness. So when you switch on a light switch in your home, the darkness doesn't combat the light. No, the darkness goes, man. It's gone. So the light is there. The darkness is gone. Salt flavors the culture, Jesus' other word. He says the culture, you need to be salt in the culture because salt does two things. First of all, it makes it flavorful. So we flavor our food. So how is the Christian going to flavor their culture and their context with the gospel? And then Jesus' emphasis on salt also emphasizes it makes it better. So it preserves the culture. It makes it last longer. So the ideas of salt and light, orphans and widows, all of this is wrapped into the same concept of caring for people in any way that we possibly can.
I love it. I love it. That was explained with seasoning, flavoring.
That's it.
We can make some progress with those statements. It's ironic that we're talking about righteous people and how this platform allows righteous people just come in and out of here all day long, every day, because of that light you just mentioned.
Yeah.
The flavors, the personalities, and the different areas where they serve. So with that being said, why is it so important that righteous people be involved in our society?
Sure. Well, we talk about Proverbs every single week, where wisdom and life connect is the point behind, the tagline behind Comenius Institute. So Proverbs 29:7 reads this way: "A righteous man knows the rights of the poor, and a wicked man does not understand such knowledge." So when I knew that Dountonia was out there doing this emphasis on a righteous person knows the rights of the poor, I wanted her on the show. We'll be hearing from her in a little bit. This idea of righteousness means straight. It doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you do everything right, but it means that you know the difference between right and wrong. So we need to step up. We need to be able to be the kinds of people who are going to do good works in the culture. So when I talk about stepping up, I want to tell you just a couple of folks that have stepped up in our Indianapolis community. First of all, I want to mention Claude Robinson. Claude was one of my students in the master's program at Capitol, and then he shadowed me. Every week he came to my Sunday school class. Every week he came to a high school class I was teaching. And now he's teaching at Ivy Tech. He's teaching in areas of crime prevention and the issues of the Department of Corrections and so on. Here's Claude, who's been in the community over 30 years doing his business of insurance. And what he said to me, he said when he was all done with his master's program, he said, "Doc, I want to go out and give back to the community." So now he's given all of his influence, all of his time, all of his effort back to the community in an educational sense. I mentioned Kevin Russell off air. Kevin is a very good friend of mine, been in a number of my classes, undergrad and graduate school. And he's going to be on the program in a couple of weeks. He works for DOC, Department of Corrections. And I just met with him yesterday. I had coffee with him. And he comes in, he's all strapped up with all his gear on. And here he has Department of Corrections on one side of his vest, and he's got Jesus on the other side of his vest.
I love it.
And his business card says Agent of Redemption. This man is not just simply a parole agent. He is an agent of redemption. So there's this faith-based emphasis now in DOC where they're rolling out faith-based emphases in helping people get reconnected into culture. Here are just two great examples of people who are righteous, doing good things in the culture.
And what's beautiful is now that you know those people, and then we have a program that deals with returning citizens every Monday. Richard Samuels and the Growing Indie program.
There it is.
Where, speaking of an agent of redemption, 26 years incarcerated, and now his whole life is committed to how can I keep people out of harm's way? How can I get them restructured once they come back out?
Excellent.
That's powerful when we can do that. And we leaving out, young lady that's coming on at the top of the hour. Her husband, I'm going to give him some love. Dr. Ramon Batts has been doing some outstanding work in this community for years and years and years. No fanfare, doesn't want any, but it's just been changing the lives of young people across this city. And that's what we have to be. That's who we need to be as we continue. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, you're going to meet the fabulous young lady we were talking about, Dountonia Batts, teaching you how to protect those who can't protect themselves. You're listening to Warp and Woof Radio. Didn't we, Dr. Mark?
That's the truth.
Old Commodores never gets old when we're talking about Jesus being loved. And we're talking today on Warp and Woof Radio about protecting those who can't protect themselves. And this has been compelling, and some of the comments that we're getting through the social media side are compelling as well.
Yes.
Going into introducing our guest today.
Yeah.
Give me some Christians, Mark, who have been involved in organizations who help protect the innocent, and some of those people we just might not know about.
Right. Well, one of them you actually do know about. Everybody in Indianapolis knows about this guy. His name is Peyton Manning. And he just came back to Indy this last week. He's been honored in Indianapolis. He's a tremendous funder for the Riley Children's Hospital, NFL Man of the Year, going all the way back to Walter Payton, of course. Some wonderful connections with lots of different people, like guys like Peyton Manning. But I got to tell you about this other guy that I heard this story a couple of years ago, and I just couldn't wait to share it on air. This is the story of Jason Brown, who played for the St. Louis Rams, and he traded in his football stardom, a huge contract, multi-million-dollar contract, to become a farmer. So look it up, CBSNews.com, look up former NFL player farms for the good. And when he was asked Why does he do this? He says, I'm doing these things in God's eyes because I think that life is about serving other people. And there it is. That's just a huge connection for us.
Unbelievable. And that's almost like, what we've been talking about all day. How big is your heart? How big can you give before you ask for anything?
That's right.
And not wanting anything back for the act of kindness and the act of giving. Before Dountonia joins us, Mark, remind us about the biblical philosophy of protecting the innocent and defending those who cannot protect themselves.
Yes. And this goes back again to the book of Proverbs. I'm looking at Proverbs 31, 8 to 9.
Indiana Tech Law School.
Excellent.
And one of my favorite questions in one of my classes that was posed to me last semester was, how do we handle this tension between truth and justice in the context of going into court and fighting for people?
Good.
And the premise they concluded that justice is the right road to pursue. Well, I'm of the belief, because my faith informs my vocation,
There it is.
that you can't separate truth from justice. Mm-hmm. I mean, without truth, justice doesn't really mean anything. How do you know what the right thing is? So they are interconnected, and that way my faith totally informs that, because if you're trying to get justice without separating it from truth, I mean, it's meaningless in my opinion. And sometimes we pursue something else, because without Christ in the center of it all, justice absolutely doesn't mean anything, because we wouldn't be able to tell what's right and what's just without knowing who God is. So.
Earlier in the show, we talked about the need to see that justice was founded upon righteousness. So there is a standard for these kinds of things. Why do you think it is in our culture today that people are struggling with actually coming right out and saying that there's a standard by which we need to abide?
It's really about just that total trying to pursue good without Christ, and that total movement towards how we're autonomous. This whole thing about autonomy is huge in the law, and we don't want to offend another person's autonomous decision. So if we admit that we are dependent upon God, then pursuing good without God is kind of like our justification for doing things, because there's we know the thought out there about people are inherently good, when we know that that's not the truth. And so that's pretty much why that pursuit is being done that way. I believe it's because we want to take God out of everything, because we can do it ourselves, so to speak.
You have a degree, MBA, as I understand. You're going toward a Juris Doctorate. And here we are talking about this issue of the perfectibility of human beings, that the Disney comment that we're basically good at heart. Talk to us a little bit about maybe through your studies, maybe some of the things that you've heard in the culture in which you inhabit, people trying to make this point that we are basically good at heart, we're very, very good people, and then connect that with the issue of justice for us, and show us why that really doesn't work all that well.
Wow. Well, I don't believe that we're good at heart, because the Bible clearly tells us that we are born into sin. So with that, trying to counter that, or trying to show people, or understanding what sin is and how we act out in that, because we're all about self-preservation.
Oh my! And
so with that, our focus is ourselves. Trying to pursue justice justice for the common person really stems from themselves and what is right for me.
Yes.
And really not thinking about how our decisions and how what we're pursuing impacts other people.
Oh man, that's good.
And so with that self-focus and not being other-centered, justice is perverted in that sense.
Oh, so. That is really good stuff. I mean, that is so deep, but it's actually the taproot of what we're talking about here today. The need to understand that we can't do this thing by ourselves, that there has to be a standard outside of us. And we have a justice system, and we have a monetary system, we have a governmental system that's desperately trying to do this on their own. And obviously that's not working too well. We can make lots of examples of anything like this. So when you think about the kinds of things that, let's say, for instance, that you would like to do in the future, how do you think about these ideas of justice and serving the needs of others? How is that going to happen for you?
Well, when I started my educational pursuit, I was totally focused on math and science.
Oh.
That was beat into me. It wasn't beaten into me, but it was, my parents are in academia. My dad was at the university, and math and science was just my total everything.
Okay.
I couldn't even imagine anything else. And then as an adult in my 30s, I believe that I've been called to law.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things that motivates me is this thing that just I can't get out of my head is fight for my people.
Oh.
And I believe that God has truly called me to do that because of a personal experience that I've gone through. But then in that situation, seeing other people struggle with simple things. The family court system is very broken. And when a person enters any aspect of the judicial system, it can make or break an individual mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. You could be incarcerated. And really helping people to navigate through that process, regardless of what the outcome is really what I'm passionate about. And so it just excites me to be able to help someone understand that whole process and to get a different perspective of the whole situation that they may be in.
One of the negatives about radio, HB, one of the negatives is that we can't see this lovely face, this face that just lights up over here.
Well, here's one thing about internet radio. We've got her pretty face out on the Facebook page.
That's right.
Go to Harold HB Bell Radio Next, Jumbo Love, all those pages, and you will meet her. Just one question that I have, and education's at the root of where my gift is now, trying to educate our young people. And the lack thereof, I mean, just a simple lack of literacy and reading skills. How much does that play into the people growing up with their lack of knowledge on being responsible?
Oh, it plays a lot into it because when I think about my grandfather who was a sharecropper, and me being in the 4th and 5th grade, tutoring my grandfather how to read. And because his total pursuit was to get a high school diploma before he passed. And he was well into his 70s and 80s as I was assisting him do that. And I think we've been removed from the struggles or the narrative of the people who've come before us has been, it's not being told. And so people take education for granted. And as I'm sitting in law school last semester, as we're going through our casebook, learning that education is not a right in our system. It is not a right. And there's a debate on whether it is a civil right or not. And, we used to talk about separate but equal, Plessy versus Ferguson. And, and how the, disparities are between different neighborhoods, how it's equal, you have equal access to certain education, but really it's dependent upon how much tax money is available to provide for that education. So it's really not equal. But the access, so to speak, from a perspective, and there's nothing that you can do about it because it's a tax issue. It's not a civil rights issue because of what goes to. So because people don't understand the importance of education and self-education. I think about Madam C.J. Walker. She's one of my heroes. When I researched her in the 4th grade, and how she self-educated herself and the importance of how that impacts your future, whether or not you get a job, not from the perspective that I'm going to school to get a good job, but from the perspective I'm going to school in order to give back to the community and to be a part of society and to contribute in a positive way, if that makes any sense.
It makes all the sense in the world. That's why warping and wolfing is so important. I mean, it sounds crazy, but every element of our society has to say, okay, this is what we're going to attack to make us a better whole. And justice can't have righteousness if the playing field isn't equal. So we're going to come right back. This is very interesting. Dountonia Batts is in the house today. Dr. Mark Eckel. Man, you guys are stirring it up, and I'm loving it. We'll be right back on the Cool Groove side. Man, let me tell you something, and I'm just being honest. If you're out and about, stop through 5435 Emerson Way. Just anytime, any day. We're bringing nothing but community news, all community, all the time, breeding and growing one another. And off air sometimes is better than on air. But we're going to get back to our great guest, Dountonia Batts. Dr. Mark Eckel, take it away.
All right. Dountonia, we're really interested, again, in your life and what you do. One of the questions that immediately came to my mind when I thought about having you on the show was, how did you become impassioned and then involved in speaking out for those who have no voice?
Well, I went through a difficult marriage. And, well, mind you, I come from a background where my parents are Christian. My dad and mom are college educated. I've never witnessed violence. I was never in any schoolyard brawl or anything. And then I married this guy, and he was abusive. It was a very short-lived marriage, but and he attacked me 4 times, and most of the time it was when I was pregnant. And but finally, the last straw was when I knew that he was capable of killing me. And so during that process, he filed for divorce, and after I left him, and it was just a year-long worth of court battles over custody, divorce, etc. False allegations. I was accused of, instead of him being the perpetrator, he got to the police first and said that because I fought back one time, and I was arrested. And so through that process, I remember it was April 2008 is when the whole concept of helping other people to live through this, because while I was being arrested, even though I was never convicted of anything, I would see women in jail, in the holding, that were going through some really devastating things. And if it wasn't for my faith, I know for a fact that I could have lost it mentally, because I was accused of things that I'm like, I'm the victim, not you. And you're getting all these services through the court system, etc. So with that came, a woman said to me one time, why don't you advocate for yourself? And then the light bulb just came on for me, because I was just so broken and had no idea what to do. How do I prove my innocence? And false witnesses were being produced, etc. I mean, it was unbelievable. And then I learned that I wasn't the only person that went through something like this. I was introduced to literature by Al Miles, who's a pastor in Hawaii, who does a lot of research on domestic violence in the church. And so that just opened my eyes into what do people going through falsely accused, family court battles, custody situations, what do they need? Well, that's when I decided that I wanted to be a courtroom advocate and to walk alongside people to help them understand the court process, like the state star witness. I'm the one that's being accused. You don't run to the police. Something simple as that. Or questions about what's next in the process, how to research that information and finding it for free without the $100 phone call to your attorney. And so really is where the birth of an organization started called Not Guilty Courtroom Advocates and Court Monitors. Just walking alongside people and giving them the tools that they need mentally, physically, and legally that they will need to effectively communicate with their attorney and to get their story out to help in the interest of justice. So,
man, I'm just shaking my head sitting here listening to this. The awfulness of abuse in the home. For those who have heard this before, I grew up in an abusive household where my mom was attacked, and so. This thing from a child's point of view I can't imagine what it's like and the interactions that you must have with children in this regard. Could you tell us something, maybe another story about how that impacts children in the home?
Wow. Fortunately for me, my children were never present when I was attacked, and they were so young that prayerfully they may not know what was truly going on in the household. But through my work in the court system, we have advocated for people whose children have witnessed abuse, and it does impact them throughout their older years and into adulthood. I even know a prosecutor in Allen County who witnessed abuse as a child, and to this day is still impacted at the age of 35. So having your children see such violence in the place where they're supposed to feel the safest can have long-lasting impact on how they view the relationship between a man and a woman, how they view themselves. Because if it's a boy, he may feel shame or guilt because he was unable to protect his mother or his sister or whomever was being abused in the home.
Yes.
People don't understand the impact of that trauma. And I just read a study where, it's post-traumatic stress disorder, and people really need to understand how that exposure, regardless of what the adults in the situation want to do after the violence subsides and there's the honeymoon period, what that is doing in the messages they're communicating to their children. And then questions even about God. Yes. If God truly loves me and protects me, where is he? And so that's what my work is really about. How do you answer those hard questions in situations like that where people are helpless and sometimes hopeless?
Yes. We desperately need these kinds of operations that you're presenting to people and giving them, obviously, in a way that are very beneficial for everyone in the justice system. And so since we're talking about the justice system, I have to ask this question, and you need to explain to us a little bit about this. How do people manipulate the court system for their own ends, for their approach to justice?
This is what I've termed this as legal system abuse, where people intentionally use the court system to oppress another person where they can't physically get to them. And that is one way is the perpetrator of abuse pretending to be the victim of abuse. Out litigating another individual, say for instance a mother who stayed home with the kids and raised them while the husband went on to pursue his educational and vocational pursuits, and therefore he's the professional and she's the homemaker. When she decides to leave, she doesn't have the resources to obtain an attorney or to fight whatever courses. So out litigating a person, taking them back and forth to court is a really common situation, and it can break a person down to the point where they'll give in and give up their rights. Because they think, I don't have anyone to fight for me. Every time I go into the court system by myself, the judge, there is no sympathy for a non-represented litigant. And because the assumption is if you're representing yourself, you need to know the law, the court rules of the court, how to present your evidence, and also how to comport yourself and how to phrase questions. So that's a lot of, it's law school in a bag. So when you decide to represent yourself, which you have the right to do, you need someone to come alongside you to lead you to the resources in order to do so effectively. And then there's ways in calling social services agencies to make false allegations of abuse and neglect of the children. Or have you ever seen an individual who never took interest in their children until they decided they didn't have them anymore? Yes. And then try to get the kids removed from them in order to hurt the individual. With false allegations and et cetera, and I don't like the government in my business. So.
Good for you. Good for you.
So having, CPS or whatever come to my doorstep is something that can be very devastating for some people. So those are ways that legal system abuse can be perpetuated.
Let me ask a question, Mark. We've been dealing with the Julian Center lately. And was just astonished about the reverse in abuse now being against men. Said that all reported cases are up to 15% versus 4% just 2 years ago. One of the major issues is just like you mentioned, husbands going back trying to upgrade their education. Almost the reverse is going on now. Husbands trying to go back to get their education so they can fit better in the marketplace. Wives being head of households. And now the abuse is flipped, so to speak. Right. Like the husband used to have all the money. I'm leaving, and now leave you in just despair. How sentimental are the courts becoming to this? And is this something that's talked about?
There is a proportionality argument out there that men and women are essentially equal. So now that this movement has gone forward, where the view of the victim, period, male or female, is starting to get some traction, starting to gain traction in the court systems. While it's, and the courts are a little bit more sympathetic now to male victims, which is the challenge, because sometimes there are many theories out there where the abuse used to be looked at as only man on woman. Now it's girl on girl, guy on guy, woman on girl. And so the courts are slowly moving towards being more sympathetic. But as the males' rights movement, as far as men having equal access to children and stuff, and the idea of the male victim, it's gaining traction. And they're starting to get, rights that sometimes, I'm sorry to say it, but sometimes those victims are false, male or female. And that's the challenge, is who are the real victims? Because we can pretend, we go through this stereotypical or the paradigmatic victim attributes. It can get very confusing and very chaotic, and sometimes people are falsely identified as victims. So.
This is just unbelievable. I'm sitting here with my chin cupped in my hand. I'm just listening to this out of supreme empathy, but also out of supreme concern, and so thankful for somebody like yourself who has stepped in to do something that's really good in our culture and very positive for the whole of Indianapolis and specific communities as well.
Well, let's take one last break, and then when we come back, the whole time will be dedicated to hearing about this solutions, as we like to say. These are solutions that we have for you here on Warp and Woof Radio. We'll be right back. Dountonia Batts is in the house. Dr. Mark Eckel, Warp and Woof Radio. Like midweek prayer meeting.
It is.
So we are taking offerings as well. No, I'm just kidding. No, we're just fortunate and blessed to have Dountonia Batts in the house. And Mark, you just take it away. I'm sitting back here just overwhelmed.
All right. Well, Dountonia, we just need to hear about your nonprofit, which is entitled Not Guilty. And the questions for you are, why did you start it and what's your goal?
I started it because there was a gap in the system, especially for individuals who are falsely accused of domestic violence, who are indeed the victims. Once you're identified in the system as as a perpetrator of a domestic violence crime, the resources that should be available to traditional victims are not available to you. So I saw that there was a gap in that. And then at doing so, families were being torn apart because of the fact that a mother who is identified as the perpetrator of abuse has the potential to lose her child. And so custody battles and how to effectively represent your story to your attorney, let alone in court, is essential. How to communicate, what evidences are they going to need. Sometimes a person in that situation is so devastated that they can't think clearly to go through the steps to get themselves in a better position. For instance, crying in court is not an admirable quality. It doesn't garner any more sympathy upon you. As a matter of fact, it may make you look unstable. Showing up to, just because you don't have the transportation doesn't mean you get a bye on not going to court. You have to be in court. And so helping people get the resources for transportation, emergency housing, maybe job skills development, life skills development, and then most importantly is how to effectively communicate with your attorney. And ensuring that no contact orders and protective orders are in place and enforced and served properly. So when the courts finally sort out the situation and they grant the real victim the protective order, making sure that they are followed up. A permanent protective order lasts 2 years. Permanent protective orders are 2 years long. So renewing the protective order, calling the police, whether or not the person leaves when that individual when the police is called or not, you still need to get it documented. So coming alongside an individual to fill the gap that the court systems or other social service agencies were not meeting was the reason Not Guilty was formed.
Oh, that's great. I'm just sitting over here shaking my head up and down and feeling so wonderful that there's somebody like you who's going to do this. Now, at the end of the day, when we talk about what this thing looks like in the future, what do you foresee this becoming or being in the future, your organization?
We have a program called the Lighthouse Court Watch. So a huge component is getting data to see how effectively our courts are working for the family violent victim, for the victims of family violence, rather, whether from the child, the perpetrator. We always want to put the focus on the battered, What about the batterer and his or her understanding of what they're doing and how they can come through that and what God has for their lives? And then, and also judges, lawyers, prosecutors getting the education on what really family violence is about. It's not just a criminal law matter. It goes so much further than that. And there are so many nuances because it's a private crime. What does self-defense look like in the home? You know, for all intents and purposes, the courts make it look like an individual who's a victim doesn't have a right to defend themselves because they can find themselves in a cell because they defended themselves against a person who was attacking them, irregardless. Yes. And I know regardless if that individual is your spouse or your significant other. So the realities of that is crucial. And
sometimes we have these portrayals on screen. For instance, I'm thinking about J-Lo's Enough, for instance, you know, where she has this, and Hollywood sets it up in such a way that gives us the happy ending, the good ending that we all want at the end of the day. But this isn't the way this thing happens in the realities of real life. So when you think about the issues of, let's just take the issue of self-defense, for instance, fill that out a little bit more for us and help us to expand our own thinking about how does that play out in these kinds of situations.
In abuse situations, statistics have shown that strangulation is the number one preference for an abuser. And strangulation is not something simple, and sometimes people call it choking, but the technical term is strangulation. It's done where a person can use their forearm or a piece of fabric to compress the throat area, and it doesn't leave marks. So if an individual is fighting to get that person off of them, their attacker off of them, they may scratch or punch and leave marks on the attacker. So in that instance, when the police are called, the real attacker, the one who was doing the strangling, doesn't have any marks on him. Has marks, but the person who was defending themselves does not have marks. So in a situation, he said, she said, the cops may arrest the person who initiated the attack. And that's how a person can get caught up in the system, and then that's how things get flipped around. So
something very interesting that you said, Dountonia, is about not only helping the victim, but also finding out the abuser. The fine line between, okay, this was a volatile situation in your marriage. We need to separate you two. Lady gets her counseling. She needs counseling. The abuser gets his counseling. How do we, though, let those two know maybe you're volatile together, even though you're going to get your psychological counseling, Mr. Who is abuser, Miss, we're getting you back together. How do we keep love out of trying to get that fire back together, so to speak? Because that's a potential, I don't know, would I say problem or a potential dilemma we might have?
Yes, that's an interesting point, because that is something that is being thought of in people who work on how to address these issues, because sometimes they just want the battering to stop, but they want their family whole.
Yeah.
And we have to respect that, and there are reasons why people go back and all this stuff, which we probably won't address today. But the basic thing is, I honestly don't believe that behavior modification is the right way to go. It has to do with a spiritual component and ensuring that there's a circle of accountability around those individuals, and checking in with them and being honest about what's really going on. It's such a hard thing, because people's lives could be in danger, and we can't deny that fact. But you can't also ignore the fact that maybe they want that family to be whole again, and wholeness only comes through Christ. I mean, you cannot, and from my perspective, sharing this, we always try to think about, where does domestic violence come from? Is it from patriarchy? Is it, just people wanting their way? And it's not an anger issue, because people don't get mad and just go pounding on someone. It's not an anger issue. It's a control issue that stems from that sin nature, that it's a sin problem. Domestic violence is a sin problem, and apart from God, we're not going to be able to get a handle on it.
So this Warping and Woofing with Comenius may be introducing those abusers to Christ in a way where it's digestible, instead of like, I'm hitting you in the head with this, and if you don't get this, but it has to be introduced, and has to be, as we say, breed Christians on milk and let them go eat meat later. Right. I am impressed. I am overwhelmed.
This is a huge issue for us. I wonder if, just as we're finishing up here the hour, I wonder if you could give us a story or two about how your work at Not Guilty has been beneficial to others.
Well, one of my favorite stories is a 19-year-old mother who, all of our cases aren't necessarily domestic violence, but family issues is my passion. So this 19-year-old mom couldn't take care of her daughter, so she gave her to a family friend. And the family friend raised the young girl for a couple of years, but the mom got up on her feet, got a house, and we were able to help her ensure that she had the proper accommodations for the baby, food. She had a job. She was, getting herself back together, and she wanted her daughter back. But this individual would not give the baby back. So she had a guardianship, the individual she gave the daughter to. And so we had to go to court. She could not afford, the 19-year-old could not afford an attorney, but the other individual did have an attorney. So what we did was help the girl educate herself on how she was to present her case in court, introduced her to the information, showed her how to research the law on guardianships in the law library, and how to present her case. And I was able to give her questions of things she might consider, and walk her through that whole process and how to care for her daughter from that point on. And she was successful. That was one of my favorite cases. Another case involves where a father was sexually abusing his daughter, and the court granted the father custody of the child because they believed that the child was coached. And so while that individual has, that situation didn't turn out the way we would like it. It wasn't a happy ending. But walking alongside the clients to understand that even in this ugliness, that God still has a purpose, and helping them to understand how to, instead of being emotional when you're communicating to your attorney, giving them points of information that can actually help move the case forward. And finally, it's moving forward in a more positive direction. But for the longest time, the way the court views you can really have an impact on how they respond to your situation. Like, violating court orders is not a way to get in positively. Regardless of what you feel the situation is, you still must obey court orders. Showing up for court is an essential part, can skew the way the court views you, which is not fair, but we know that, and I believe that our judges do look at the law and are objectionable, look at it from an objective perspective, but still, you have to understand that there are little things that kind of skew the way the court sees you. So sometimes it doesn't come out the way that we would hope that it would come out. Right. But still being okay and understanding that there's still purpose in this situation.
The difficulty of providence, the idea that while we understand that God is in control, the things that we have to deal with on the underside and on the earth side, we don't get to see heaven's plan. We don't get to see the benefit that God is going to bring in the future, and the difficulty that presents for us as human beings. But you've so well presented this to us today, and the need for wholeness for us as a culture, in families, and then your emphasis on the church and the spiritual direction that this needs to take is huge. Any final comments for our listeners today?
I would just say that the one Bible verse that inspires all of my work is Colossians 4:17. Tell Archippus to complete the work you have been given in the Lord. And so that I just want people to know that no matter what situation you may find yourselves, legal, financial, educational, that God has a purpose for you, and it's my prayer that you find what that purpose is for your life and to pursue it.
Wow. This has been so great, HB.
Brother, we said information is what we want to share, and I'm sitting here just stunned because how many people need this information? I would bet you 80% of the people who come out of that court system, especially criminal court system, have no information, no place to go get information, or know how to start to begin
Right.
the process. First of all, how to stay out of trouble, but after they're in trouble, the roads that need to be taken for understanding. And Dountonia, I'm overwhelmed.